Le ha dicho que sí al proyecto de constitución impulsado por el gobierno y un 42% le ha dicho que no.
Querido pueblo de Bolivia, hoy 25 de enero del 2009, gracias a la voluntad soberana, gracias a la conciencia del pueblo boliviano, se refunda una nueva Bolivia con igualdad de oportunidades para todos los bolivianos, para todas las bolivianas.
अब हाम्रो यो डेलिगेसन हाई लेभल डेलिगेसन हो 3 पार्टी जो 2/3 मेजोरिटी होल्ड गरेको पार्टीका नेताहरू छन् त्यसैगरी चाहिँ हामी संविधान लेखन प्रक्रिया जो असाध्यै जटिल प्रक्रिया हो जनताको सहभागिता हुन्छ जनताका अपेक्षाहरू हुन्छ त्यसलाई डेमोक्रेटिक ढंगले चाहिँ संविधानमा लेख्नुपर्ने हुन्छ त्यसमा चाहिँ हामीले यहाँका अनुभवहरू लिएर हामीले एउटा नयाँ र जनताको संविधान लेख्न सक्छौं भन्ने हामी चाहिँ एउटा आफ्नो यहाँका अनुभवबाट हामी त्यो विश्वास दिलाउन चाहन्छौँ
अनि केही कुराहरु त अवश्य पनि पाउला उपलब्धमूलक नै होला र हामीले यो संविधान बनाउने क्रममा केही अध्ययन गरौँ भनेर नआएको हो त्यसकारणले उपलब्धिमूलक नै हुन्छ त्यो
Okay, so 3 more people, please.
Buenos días. This is the Minister of Foreign Affairs and this is the Sub-Minister. Buenos días. Muy bien, la delegación de Nepal. Mucho gusto. Please take a seat.
Bien, quiero agradecerle
esta
visita.
We thank you for your visit.
Nepal es un país poco conocido para nosotros.
It's not a country that we know a great deal about.
Y también queremos agradecerles
And we thank you so much for the interest that you have in
las reformas.
Bolivia and learning about our process of constitutional reform and the revolutionary process of huge social transformation. My understanding is that you will be meeting with the protagonists of this new political constitution of the state that allows us to defend our interests
que defienda los intereses de todos los bolivianos.
The interests of all Bolivians.
Porque en el pasado,
because in the past,
teníamos leyes
we had laws
que han permitido un saqueo sistemático
that facilitated the systematic pillaging of our natural resources for 500 years. So it's just recently that we have taken on the task of creating new laws that defend the interests of all Bolivians. That's why I'm delighted that you're here in Bolivia, that you've come from Nepal to visit us. I don't think that it's very often that a person from Nepal is in Bolivia. So this is a significant event, and it's important for you to learn about what's happening in Bolivia. And we are also eager to learn about your reality in Nepal.
I'd like to express my sincere thanks and appreciation for making our visit possible to your beautiful country. As you are already aware of, the primary purpose of our visit is to learn from your experiences on constitution making and promoting indigenous people's rights and broadly deepening democracy. In our team of delegation, we are 7 people, 6 from Nepal and 1 from Bangladesh. There are two primary reasons we chose Bolivia. The first is that indigenous peoples in both countries share the history of subordination, discrimination and exclusion. Along this, both countries also share the history of indigenous resistance and rebellions and collective effort for autonomy and retain their culture and tradition within democratic framework. The second reason is that Bolivia has been an example for all in successful work incorporating indigenous people's rights in constitution and implementing them. More especially, we would like to understand the process and dynamics of the constitution making process in Bolivia and its challenges and positive examples with regards to indigenous people's participation, and also to understand the institutional mechanism to implement the constitutional and other legal provisions. It is hoped that the knowledge gained from the study tour can be used constructively in the ongoing constituent assembly processes in Nepal, particularly with regard to finding workable models for some of the key issues being discussed by the 10 thematic committees of the Constituent Assembly.
So
I thank Carlos for arranging for this meeting and for the representative of the UN. I hope you have a wonderful stay.
Since I became a member of a permanent assembly for indigenous people, we were talking in discussion with the United Nations with people from the labor organization that there was parallelism between the Bolivian process, in which we still did not have a new state political constitution, and the process that was being undertaken in Nepal. So we had agreed to work in an exchange of experiences between constituent assembly members between country of Nepal and Bolivia. Bolivian process at an international level has been very successful, and it has been an example regarding the constitutionalization of the indigenous people rights.
हामीसँग तीनवटा राजनीतिक शक्ति थियो जतिखेर हामी चाहिँ उसमा गृहयुद्धमा थियौं। पछिल्लो समयमा माओइस्ट पक्ष र चाहिँ संसदवादी पार्टीहरू मिलेर हामी राजालाई पराजित गर्यौं र हामी गणतन्त्र स्थापना गर्यौं। त्यसो गर्दा हामी केही महत्त्वपूर्ण परिवर्तनहरू सँगसँगै भए। एकातिर हामी पिस प्रोसेस सुरु गर्यौं र अर्को चाहिँ हामीले सबै पार्टी केमा एग्री गर्यौं भने नेपालमा वर्गीय, जातीय, क्षेत्रीय, लिङ्गीय र चाहिँ जस्तै वर्णजन्य 5 वटा समस्याहरू छ, त्यसलाई हामी संविधान सभा मार्फत एउटा समाधान गर्ने भनेर चाहिँ हामी एग्री गरेका थियौं।
आदिवासी जनजातिहरू नेपालमा धेरै 250 वर्षको शासन युगमा अलिकति अधिकारबाट वञ्चित यो राजनीतिमा सहभागी नहुने परम्पराले गर्दाखेरि हामीहरू धेरै पछि परेका छौँ। 2007को यो ठुलो जनआन्दोलनको त्यसमा आदिवासी जनजातिहरूको ठुलो भूमिका रह्यो र यो सङ्घीय आन्दोलनपछि सङ्घीय लोकतान्त्रिक गणतन्त्र घोषणा भयो र सङ्घीय सभा संविधान सभाको निर्वाचन भयो। संविधान सभाको निर्वाचनको परिणाममा आदिवासी जनजातिहरू 218 सिटमा उपस्थित भएको छ। अन्तरिम संविधानमा 2/3 बहुमत भएपछि मात्रै संविधानहरू पास हुने, त्यसैलाई मध्यनजर राखेर विभिन्न पार्टीका 218 जना आदिवासी जनजाति सभासदहरूको एउटा ककस बनाएका छौँ।
The job of the IP caucus is to ensure that rights of the indigenous peoples are incorporated into the constitution. The major demands of the indigenous people has been secular state, rights to indigenous peoples on the land and territories, respect to their culture and language. They would like to have a federal state design which recognizes the language and ethnic equality. Nepal is the first country in the mainland Asia to ratify ILO 169. In this context, we understand that Bolivia has already gone through the Constituent Assembly process, which is the most progressive in terms of ensuring indigenous people's rights. We would like to learn from the Bolivian experience how you have implemented ILO 169 and how did you deal with the resistance coming from the dominant groups?
We believe that the new constitution has opened up the space for indigenous people in this country, in reality, to resolve an historical problem of a social exclusion of indigenous people and Afro-Bolivians, also people from African descendants.
As commissioners, we are profoundly committed with the struggle against discrimination, not just racial discrimination, but also discrimination against women. Hope was to combine the plurinational concept with the recognition of the pre-existence of indigenous people to the nation state and their right to self-determination, with a new structure of the territory of the state and with a specific relation to natural resources. So what the political constitution of Bolivia did was to guarantee the rights of the peoples and nations to their natural resources and exclusive use of the renewable resources in the territories. This means that fundamental decisions for the nation need to be consulted with the people in a democratic fashion. And in this regard, the Constitution enshrines the right to free, prior, informed consent and not just consultation.
In the Constitution, we have issues such as community justice, indigenous autonomy, to constitutionalize indigenous government, but now, in this time, we're entering in what we call the Earth rights. There are different proposals regarding Mother Earth, but not only rights. We can write 1,000 rights on Mother Earth. We're talking about the obligations of men towards the Earth. That is the biggest and the largest construction and challenge that we have, that Evo Morales wants to present to the world. And this means that it is not only indigenous rights, but it's also something bigger.
A cosmovision, integration, territorial administration, environmental administration, plus benefits on renewable resources. And these people should be asked about these resources. This would be a concept of indigenous autonomies.
How did you reference Convention 169 and the UN Declaration in the work you did on the articles on education in general.
Porque en nuestro país existen 36 nacionalidades.
See, there's 36 indigenous peoples. So what we said, in Bolivia there are 36 nationalities, which means that there are 36 official languages in our country. We have all 36 languages are now constitutionally recognized by the Constitution.
Esto implica
which means that
que los idiomas se los debe enseñar
those languages need to
en todos
be
los
taught
territorios que correspondan.
in the territories where they are
Como lengua
spoken.
madre,
So they have mother tongue,
el castellano como la lengua nacional,
and you have the national language, which is
pero
Spanish,
también algún idioma que pueda hacer la conexión con el mundo.
and also a foreign language, such as English.
No nos estamos encerrando en
So
nosotros mismos.
we're not closing ourselves in an
Pero
insular
tenemos que partir
fashion,
de nosotros
but we
mismos.
have to start with our own culture and
En
languages.
este momento, en la mucho más.
Now we are in the next stage
Es una fase en la que requiere más entrega.
that
para que
requires
se haga
even
realidad
more
esta política.
commitment and sacrifice.
Porque no es suficiente tener
Because
el documento escrito.
It's not enough to
sino
have it
cómo
written on a
ponerlo
piece of paper.
en la práctica.
The question
Hoy
is,
estamos
how do
luchando por
we
poner en la práctica.
make it come
En
alive?
educación estamos
How do
pensando
we
cómo
implement it?
hacer que la educación tiene que ser comunitaria.
It needs to be productive
Cómo la educación
education,
tiene que estar
community
tiene que
education.
estar al acceso de la población.
Needs to be accessible to everybody.
De hecho, que la educación que tengamos es el
So-
verdadero instrumento de cambio
So
para
the
las futuras
education
generaciones.
is the tool for the transformation and change we want for future generations. And now we're working
el diseño
on
curricular
the
base.
design of curriculum.
Diseño curricular base del sistema educativo plurinacional.
Which will be the basis for the pluricultural, plurilingual education system.
What is the proportion of girls and boys enrollment in the schools and colleges in Bolivia?
Last
hace años que había más mujeres,
show that there are more girl children,
pero también hay una relatividad en algunos años que baja. Estamos casi
but it
50-50.
varies more or less 50-50. Yeah? So one of the most important advances is the work we've been doing on bilingual education. And we have a vice ministry on bilingual education that was created. And also in the curriculum in the schools, it does stipulate that education should be delivered in the mother tongue. And now, for example, people who don't speak indigenous languages can study them in school. So this is a very powerful way of fighting racism. But we have very few professionals and didactic materials and budget for doing this.
There will be now the indigenous justice system that will be institutionalized, generalized in the country, and on an equal foot of the ordinary justice. So this has to be built up as an institution. It is existing. It is existing. Many communities were doing their own justice based on their traditions and their rules. But now with the new constitution, the idea is to have it over all the territory. So this is a huge challenge, a huge achievement of the new constitution, but a huge challenge. that we will have.
the indigenous issue as a legal pluralism, which would imply the acknowledgement of an indigenous jurisdiction. And it also implies another concept of the values and another way of applying justice in the sense of a harmonization instead of vigilance.
What is the position of indigenous people in the judiciary system?
There's an indigenous person running the ministry, pero está usted.
No, en el órgano judicial no hay.
There's some indigenous lawyers, but in the transition, they're using the old criteria, and the criteria is that you have to be a lawyer.
Whether it is in the case of general people or in the case of customary laws of the indigenous people.
Will indigenous legal systems law be applied to non-indigenous peoples? Every indigenous person will be judged by their own legal system, and they have to return to their territory. If they commit a crime outside of their territory, they have to return to their territory to be judged by their own legal system. Our customary law doesn't contradict human rights. Our customary law respects life.
Lok la kiket, lok la sud, ku te feo da chuang peo khakh ma kam Jesus. Khom ga ba te ni khasna. Muy buenas tardes a todos.
So good afternoon. Welcome to the Indigenous Municipality of San Tomas Chichicastenango. So the ratification of Convention 169 really helped our people put their feet on the ground and realize the rights that they
Queremos
have.
compartir con ustedes.
We're trying to get our cultural heritage back. So we're very happy that you're here sharing with us here in Chichicastenango, but we're also sad. We're sad because in this struggle, our rights are still being violated, and we still haven't been able to recover our cultural heritage, even though we are the owners of this cultural heritage.
यहाँ सामान्यतः गाउँमा जाँदाखेरि पनि यो अन्तर्राष्ट्रिय श्रम सङ्गठनको सन्धिहरूको कुराहरू राम्रो व्याख्या गरेको पाइयो एउटा कुरा। अर्को कुरा यहाँ आदिवासी जनजातिहरूको सङ्गठन मैले राम्रो पाएँ।
बोलिभियाको भ्रमणबाट चाहिँ अध्ययन भ्रमणबाट हामीले कसरी नयाँ संविधानमा आदिवासीहरूको अधिकार ILO कन्भेन्सन 169 ले व्यवस्था गरे अनुरूपको या युनाइटेड नेसन्स डिक्लेरेसन अन द राइट्स अफ इन्डिजिनस पिपल अन्ड्रिपको जे व्यवस्था छ त्यसलाई कसरी संविधानमा चाहिँ सभा मार्फत चाहिँ नयाँ संविधानमा चाहिँ व्यवस्था गरिया छ भन्ने कुरा सिक्नलाई हो। हाम्रो संसदीय सङ्घर्ष संविधान सभामा गरेको सङ्घर्ष र चाहिँ सडकको सङ्घर्षलाई समायोजन गर्नुपर्छ एउटा कुरा। दोस्रो कुरो आदिवासीहरू भित्रका चाहिँ जो चाहिँ सानातिना चाहिँ मतभेदहरू हुन्छन् नि त्यो सबैलाई चाहिँ तत्कालै थाती राखेर हामी युनिफाइड हुनु पर्यो। त्यसरी मात्र चाहिँ हामीले चाहिँ आफ्नो चाहिँ मुद्दाहरूलाई सही दिशामा चाहिँ पुर्याउन सक्छौँ, हामीले चाहिँ आफ्नो सफलता प्राप्त गर्न सक्छौँ भन्ने बोलिभियाको चाहिँ बाट सिक्न सक्छौँ।
One of the things that we found very interesting is one like traditional authority that you are managing or you are running. How the leaders of traditional authorities are elected. How do you get your resources and budget? We wanted to understand this because the work that you're doing in traditional authority is in line with the principle of self-determination, self-rule enshrined in ILO 169 and UNDRIP.
En una comunidad hay varios habitantes.
So, in a community, you have a bunch of different people living. All these dots mean the people, okay?
Dentro de todo esto, proponen una persona.
And so out of all of the people in the community, they propose a person who complies with a certain characteristics and qualities and capacity. To be a traditional authority, you have to have the following characteristics. First of all, you have to be an honorable person, somebody who doesn't partake of vices. You can't have a bad history. You have to be very, very honored, very respected, very clean. So the community identifies somebody to be the traditional authority or the indigenous mayor, and you serve for a year. But you don't get any salary, no wage whatsoever. We here in Cotonicapán solve problems in 2 or 3 hours. We have our own form of justice and we quickly resolve the problem. And it's important to note that indigenous administration of justice saves the state a lot of money.
How ILO 169 and UNDRIP is being implemented. Because ILO 169 was also made a law in Bolivia in 1996 after ratification. So how was that implemented?
Bolivia was the first country in the world to adopt as a law the UN Declaration, the new UN Declaration on Indigenous Peoples' Rights. And they have incorporated in such a way that it's also considered now as being part of the, with the new constitution, as the heart of the constitutional norms, and it's in the heart of the protection of the human rights. So we will see, I think, in the future, coupled with ILO 169, this protection to be implemented in such a way as to be more effective.
Trabajo lo hemos firmado como Estado.
Okay, so you know that Convention 169 has been not only ratified but is law in Bolivia.
Porque como Estado somos los más interesados en llevar adelante todos esos convenios internacionales
as a state we
que
are
encaminan
most
la
interested
integración
in
de nuestra
implementing
población
those.
en el continente y en el mundo entero.
Because really they are key, implementing them is key to integrating indigenous peoples both in our country and to the world.
In Guatemala, really the problem isn't whether indigenous people's rights are included in the Constitution or not. We have a problem of a lack of implementation of what's already on the books in the Constitution. But if it's not reflected in the national budget, it doesn't change anything.
Indigenous people of Guatemala are facing great problems in the implementation of the ILO Convention 169 and UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. It is because of the lack of budget to implement the programs and policies.
It's not just money, it's also mentality. That's another huge challenge. It's not just a question of the lack of budget.
सम्झौता आफैमा ठुलो कुरा होइन रहेछ इम्प्लिमेन्टेसन कार्यान्वयनमा त्यसले चाहिँ तपाईको चाहिँ ढोका दिन सक्छ त्यसकारणले आदिवासीको त्यो युनिटी चाहिँ त्यो सोलिडारिटी अन्तिमसम्म चाहिँ रहिरहनु पर्छ भन्ने कुरा चाहिँ यो ग्वाटेमालाबाट सिक्न सकिन्छ
अनि तपाईहरुले चाहिँ यहाँको आदिवासी जनजाति आन्दोलनलाई कसरी एड्रेस गर्नुभयो सुरक्षा निकायमा राज्यका अरु अंगहरुमा
The discrimination against indigenous peoples, against women, really caused the armed conflict, and since it's a structural problem, talked a lot about increasing the participation of the peoples who have been historically excluded, but the structure has not changed. 83% of the victims of the armed conflict were indigenous. 83%. The UN accompanied the process of the implementation of the accords, but when they left, they said that only 5% of the accords had been implemented on the rights of indigenous people, rights and identity of indigenous people. I think that 5 to 10% of the accord on indigenous people's rights and identity has been implemented.
How did you
Mi pregunta es
integrate the ex-guerrillas?
¿cómo se integraron los excombatientes
proyectos que apoyaron todos
There
su
were
proceso de
projects
documentación.
to provide them with ID cards and credentials.
También su incorporación económica y productiva.
And to incorporate them into civil society with jobs and economic measures.
Programas de atención especial a personas con discapacidad.
Special programs for guerrilla fighters who were disabled.
हामीले पनि चाहिँ तपाईको माओवादी चाहिँ कम्ब्याटमेन्टहरुलाई चाहिँ कसरी चाहिँ सिभिल लाइफमा फर्काउने पुनर्स्थापन गर्ने कतिलाई चाहिँ तपाईको चाहिँ आर्मी पुलिसमा सेक्युरिटी फोर्समा राख्न सकिने त्यसलाई उनीहरुलाई चाहिँ रोज्न दिनु पर्यो एउटा हैन त्यसो गर्दाखेरि अलिकति सजिलो हुँदो रहेछ भन्ने लाग्यो मलाई
I just wanted to ask, if I may, if you could provide any advice. How should we go forward in the peace process?
Those of you that are reforming your constitution or drafting a new one,
Es importante que
it's
todo lo que
very
quede
important
constitucionalmente
that everything that's contained in the constitution
se vea reflejado en el presupuesto.
is duly reflected in the budget and the allocations for the implementation of the content of the Constitution.
If we were reforming our Constitution, what would I say?
Es que se formen artículos
I would make
de ley
sure
que
that there's
beneficien
articles
a
that
los indígenas, pero que sean
benefit
reales
indigenous peoples, but you gotta make them real. You gotta make sure that they're
y
implemented,
que se apliquen
that they're
en beneficio
applied
del pueblo indígena.
for indigenous peoples.
Porque aquí están como letra muerta. No,
Because here there's some very nice things on paper, but none of it's applied.
So listen to your people, dialogue with your people, listen to the heart of your people. That's the secret, that's the key for achieving peace.
You have a huge opportunity to draft a constitution that is as humanist as ours and to give participation to the majority of the population indigenous. Otherwise, your democracy just simply won't work. You're in a very important, special moment in history, not just for you, but for the world. And peace is just built when all of the people are willing to make peace a reality. So the peace accords are important, but institutionalizing them and implementing them is much more important. So I wish you the best. And a warm embrace from me to you. And I hope that you'll be able to achieve the founding of a nation with peace, but with peace with justice. So I wish you a safe journey home. Thank you very much.